Welcome to Hamburgers and Horror, the home of meat, monsters, and McCready's luscious locks. I'm Noah Hook, and today we're looking at John Carpenter's The Thing. The Thing follows a 12-man Antarctic research crew that is invaded by an extraterrestrial creature capable of perfectly mimicking other living things. The Thing is an absolute treasure, with incredible practical effects, a top-notch cast, and themes that remain relevant to this day. I would really need to sit down and think about it, but The Thing is definitely in my top 5, if not my number 1 favorite horror movies of all time. Which isn't uncommon, as it is widely regarded as one of the top dogs in the genre, but it wasn't always so highly regarded, and it actually has a pretty complicated history. The Thing began assimilating way back in 1938 in John W. Campbell's science fiction novella, Who Goes There? The book features a much larger 37-man crew, and they are the ones who find it frozen in the ice and thaw it, and it ends up assimilating 15 men before the Thing is defeated. The men destroy their own means of transportation, fearing the Thing's escape. Oh, and the Thing is also telepathic, able to read minds and project thought. The first film adaptation came in 1951, with The Thing from Another World. It's a very loose adaptation of the original story, featuring James Arness, Kenneth Tobey, and Robert Cornthwaite. In this adaptation, the alien is a plant-based humanoid invader that needs animal blood to survive, capable of creating an army of its own with the seed pods contained in its bodies. I actually haven't seen the film, but it's very highly rated, considered one of the best films of 1951 and one of the best science fictions of all the 1950s, so I'll have to check it out sometime. But my point is that the 1982 version is a much closer adaptation to the novella, although the telepathy is omitted. Universal acquired the rights in 1976, and producer Stuart Cohen contacted Carpenter about directing, but he was mainly an independent director at the time and not too keen about a huge studio movie. Carpenter also noted The Thing from Another World as one of his favorite movies and knew it would be hard to surpass. So time went on and multiple writers and directors were considered, but nothing ended up sticking, including a partially underwater Tobe Hooper flick. The project was put on hold for a bit, but the smashing success of Alien revitalized the project in 1979. By then, Carpenter had read the novella and was really interested in the themes of paranoia in the book, as well as the Thing's assimilation process, which The Thing from Another World didn't really cover. His notoriety from Halloween got investors super interested in him, and he eventually decided to take on the project after all. Bill Lancaster, writer of The Bad News Bears, had penned the first draft both producers and Carpenter really liked. The two met frequently to iron out the story and its many details and mysteries. Rob Bottin was in charge of the movie's creature effects. Bottin is an amazing special effects artist, creating creatures we love in Piranha, The Fog, The Howling, Star Wars, and Total Recall. It was actually his idea to have the creature be a continuously changing form. He and Carpenter agreed on one thing: they did not want the Thing to just be a guy in a suit. Bottin, who was actually only 21 at the time, was hospitalized because of his exhaustive workload. He lived on the Universal lot for a year, never taking a day off. To take some of the work off himself and his team, Bottin brought on Stan Winston and his team to help design and create, primarily working on the dog thing. The Thing ended up having a $15 million budget, $1.5 million of that going towards the special effects for the movie, which was way over all of the initial estimates, so a lot of scenes had to be cut or simplified. The Thing was released in 1982 and met with horribly negative reviews. Usually I go over the general public consensus of the movie before I jump into the plot, but I'm actually going to go over the story first so I can explain what the public disliked about The Thing when it first came out. And I'm just ready to talk about some badass monsters. Grab your flamethrowers and blood samples, everybody. It's time to watch The Thing. We open on a UFO cruising through space and heading towards our beautiful blue orb. And then we get a title card. It's the winter of 1982 in Antarctica as we watch two men in a helicopter pursue a good boy. They shoot at the dog but understandably miss. The dog reaches the US National Science Station, where we get a peek at the crew, specifically one chess-playing, scotch-drinking, sore-losing hunk, R.J. McCready. They hear the helicopter circling the camp and identify it as Norwegian. The dog reaches the group, and this Norwegian doesn't give a fuck about casualties and plans to blow them all up. But he got some butterfingers and drops the live grenade in the snow. His buddy logically gets the fuck out of there while he scrambles around to find it, blowing himself and the helicopter up. The panicked Norwegian warns them that the thing isn't a dog, only imitating one, but the Americans can't understand him. He shoots at the dog some more, hitting Bennings in the leg. Station Commander Gary clumsily busts out a window and snipes the crazed Norwegian with a headshot. The men put out the fire and Clark the dog handler finds his new buddy. Now seems like a good time to introduce everyone on the crew because they all have their own unique traits, and once the crazy shit starts, it's important to keep tabs on everyone. We have RJ McCready, played by Kurt Russell. He is the likely final boy and the helicopter pilot. There's the station's doctor, Copper, Bennings, who was shot by the Norwegian, and is also the station's meteorologist, the radio operator, Windows, who hasn't been able to reach anyone in 2 weeks, and senior biologist Blair, played by the wonderful Walter Brimley, who sadly passed away in 2020. We have the roller skating cook, Knowles, the assistant mechanic, Palmer, who likes his music and his weed, and of course the sharpshooting commander, Gary. There's assistant biologist, Fuchs, the geologist, Norris, Clark the dog handler, and another mechanic named Childs, played by Keith David. Copper wants to check out the Norwegian outpost and figure out why their guys were shooting at them. Mac is worried about flying in the snow, but he and Copper head out regardless. Meanwhile, the outpost's newest doggo does some exploration and enters the room of a silhouetted figure. We don't outright see it, but it's apparent that the thing assimilates this character, but who is it? It is meant to be a mystery. Carpenter actually had a crew member stand in to make the silhouette more ambiguous. A lot of what makes the thing so enthralling is the mystery and paranoia that the audience feels, and it's not really in the spirit of the movie to try to come up with concrete answers to things. But just like many others, it's simply not in me to not have theories, as that's a part of what makes the movie so fun as well. But I will get into my own theories later, just know for now that somebody has been assimilated. Mac and Copper reach the Norwegian base, which is in very bad shape. They find a bloody axe and a man with his wrists and throat slit, with even the streams of his blood frozen. While Copper collects some Norwegian documents, Mac stumbles upon a big-ass ice block that doesn't have anything in it. Outside, they find the burnt-up remains of something they can't quite identify, but it definitely has some human qualities. Mac and Copper return with their discovery as the dog watches. Really good dog acting. They unveil the body, the beautiful, stunning, practical body, and Blair is to begin an autopsy. Blair cuts the thing open and finds a bunch of normal human organs. Mr. Fusyface, wherever did you get such nice organs? Night falls and some guys play pool, some play poker, and some get high and watch game show recordings. Clark brings Thing Dog to the kennel to join his own kind, but he doesn't give off a very extroverted vibe. Oh wait, he just needs some time to open up to the other dogs. Its face splits open like a flower, it sprouts tentacles and some king crab legs and starts super soaking this poor doggo with goo. Clark hears all the commotion and gets knocked down by the escaping dogs. When he sees what they were escaping from, he quickly relocks the door. Mac hears all the commotion too and pulls the fire alarm. He doesn't even need to see the thing before telling Childs to get the flamethrower. He opens the door to find this thing. This was the creature Stan Winston was in charge of, and it sure doesn't disappoint. They didn't have time to create any complex robotics, so the dog thing's head is essentially just a hand puppet that somebody beneath the floor controlled. Fuck yeah! The dog thing beautifully wraps its tentacles around a dog, and Mac and Gary start firing. They hit one of the real dogs in the process, and Clark freaks out. Dog thing sprouts some big dinosaur hands and starts breaking through the ceiling. It sprouts more eyes and mouths just in time for Childs to light it the fuck on fire. The next morning, Blair is doing another autopsy on another beautiful pile of gore. He explains to the crew that this thing can perfectly replicate other life forms. In order to do so, it needs to digest that form so it can recreate it. He shows them what is real dog and what is imitation dog, and says it was going to recreate the entire pack. Blair learns that the dog thing was able to wander the camp a whole day and was alone with Clark for a while, making him instantly suspicious. While looking over some of the Norwegian tapes, Norris notices there was a spot near their camp they were focused on, and they see footage of something large under the ice that they excavated. Mac heads over with Norris and Palmer, and they find a motherfucking spaceship. They rappel down, and Norris estimates the ice as 100,000 years old. They also find a smaller excavated area near the ship, which was the ice block at the Norwegian camp. Back at the base, they hypothesized that the ice block was where an alien exited the ship and froze, which woke up and killed the Norwegians. Childs is skeptical, Palmer rambles about UFOs and conspiracies, and Blair has an idea. Through the ever-amazing power of 1980s computers, he is somehow able to observe and display what the thing does at a cellular level. Its cells attack the host, devour it, and duplicate it. The computer also somehow has enough information to throw out wild statistics about the destruction of all life on Earth. That kind of news gets Blair packin'. Mac is looking at a tattered shirt Knowles found in the kitchen when he gets a call to move some of his things out of the storeroom to make room for the bodies. Bennings and Windows carry one in when Fuchs asks Mac to speak with him privately. Windows goes to get the keys from Gary, leaving Bennings alone with the not-so-dead thing. Outside, Fuchs tells Mac that Blair has locked himself away, and in his writings, he found that Blair discovered the cells of the burnt dog thing are still active. Maybe you should have keyed Bennings in on that, Fuchs, then maybe he wouldn't be a tentacle sandwich right now. Windows finds Mac and Fuchs, they set off the alarm, and find the Benning things trying to escape. They circle it and the thing lets out a horrifying scream. Out of all the iconic scenes in the movie, this was definitely the one that stuck with me most as a kid. Mac dumps some kerosene and the group watches the Benning things light up. They gather the other things' bodies and burn them as well, but they notice Blair is missing. Mac catches him running from the helicopter and finds that he hacked it up beyond repair. Mac runs inside to find out he also destroyed the tractor and killed the rest of the dogs, and he is now destroying the radio and talking to himself like a madman. In his ramblings, we can decipher that he fears the thing escaping to a more inhabited world and taking over, so he is destroying its means of escape. Childs tries to talk to him, but Blair just goes Wild West on him. Now that Blair is out of bullets, they can finally subdue him. They decide it'd be safest to lock Blair in the tool shed. As Mac is leaving, Blair tells him to watch Clark. They discuss the possibility of others being assimilated, and Copper thinks they could conduct a blood serum test to identify imposters. Mac also tells them to watch Clark as he was close to the dog thing. Fuchs wants to bring Blair back inside as he is the best equipped to figure this out, but Mac says he's too far gone. Copper and Fuchs find that all of the blood has already been tampered with, making a test impossible. Gary was the only one with a key, and Copper was the only one allowed to access it, casting a lot of suspicion on them both. Accusations are thrown and tensions fly, and a scared Windows runs off and arms himself with a shotgun. Gary disarms Windows, and Gary disarms himself, and concedes control to Mac, based on his bravery and level-headedness. They burn the blood samples, and Mac gives a good speech. He knows the thing wants to hide and wait, but will fight if necessary, and that at least some of the group is still human, otherwise he would just be attacked. Mac has the three most suspicious, Clark, Copper, and Gary, tied up and sedated with morphine. It seems that a 2-day time jump happens from here, as Mac says the storm that was just approaching has been hitting them for 48 hours. He's recording a tape to be found in case they all turn, in which he hypothesizes about the torn clothes and talks about the distrust amongst everyone. Fuchs tells Mac that everyone should eat from separate cans, as it's possible even a single cell could take over a body. The electricity goes out and Fuchs follows a mysterious figure outside. Here he finds the torn up jacket of Mr. R.J. McCready. About an hour later, the guys notice somebody blew the fuse to the lab and Fuchs has been missing. Everyone is skittish about splitting up, but it ends up being Mac, Knowles, and Windows outside, Palmer and Child searching the inside, and Norris watching the three tied up gentlemen. They agree to meet up in 20 minutes. Mac checks up on Blair, who is doing, well, maybe not well. He wants to come back inside, but he doesn't exactly sound stable, despite his promise not to harm anybody. They also find the charred remains of Fuchs, and they aren't exactly sure how and when it happened. Windows goes inside to tell the others about Fuchs, while Mac and Knowles go to Mac's shack, as somebody has turned the lights on in there. 45 minutes have passed and Mac and Knowles are still gone, so Childs and the others decide to seal off the outside doors. Norris starts having some chest pain and calls the others when he sees Knowles coming back alone. While they were searching Mac's place, he found another torn jacket. He cut McCready from the line and made a run for it back, believing him to be assimilated. They argue more about whether they think Mac is a thing, and cast more distrust on each other when Mac tries to open the door. They don't believe he could have made it back in this storm, and debate whether to burn him or not. They hear him breaking into a supply room and hack the door down, only to find him ready to blow them all up with some thermite. He has them put down the flamethrowers, but he gets attacked from behind by Norris and Knowles, but they weren't ready for that McCready strength and he fends them off. Oh shit, Norris even stopped breathing. They untie Copper so he can look at Norris, Mac saying nobody leaves his sight anymore. Looks like Norris had a heart attack and Copper grabs the defibrillators, but the others are too busy being suspicious of Mac to help out, Clark even sneaking himself a scalpel. Copper goes down for another defibrillation and Norris's chest opens up and fucking bites off Copper's hands. Then his tummy gets tentacly and gives birth to this little sweetheart. I love this movie. Mac lights the thing up, not noticing the original Norris head detaching itself from the body. It uses its tongue to drag itself away while the fire is put out, but that's not very efficient, so it sprouts some legs and big snail-looking eyes. It tries to make its getaway, but is caught and burned. Nice try, little guy. Mac wants to conduct a test and everyone to be tied up. They argue about whether or not he'd actually blow himself up, and Childs refuses to be tied up. While Mac is busy threatening Childs, Clark tries to stab him with a scalpel and receives a headshot. He and Copper are tied up, as is everyone except Mac and Windows. After watching the Norris thing, Mac believes that any portion of the thing will defend itself from attack. So he is going to draw a little bit of blood from everyone to see how it reacts to a hot needle. They extract blood from their thumbs, which seems like one of the most impractical places to cut yourself in a dangerous situation, and Mac heats up a sharpened wire. He tests Windows' blood first, and with no effect, he looks clear, which means he gets to hold the flamethrower. Mac also clears himself, as well as Copper and Clark, meaning Mac killed a human, not a thing. Up next is Palmer, but people are getting kind of skeptical about this whole blood test thing. Oh, looks like we got a bite! Palmer starts wiggling and jiggling and bleeding and screaming, eventually breaking free of its restraints. Mac's flamethrower isn't working, and Windows is too slow and gets his face nommed on. It tosses Windows aside and Mac finally lights the thing on fire. It busts through the wall and collapses outside, and Mac sends it off with a bang. Now Windows is beginning to assimilate, but Mac puts a stop to that as well. Back to testing, and Knowles is all clear and gets to hold the flamethrower. Childs also passes, and all that's left is Gary. And Gary passes with flying colors, so Mac, Childs, Knowles, and Gary are all cool. All that's left to do is test Blair's crazy ass. Uh-oh, looks like Blair's gone. They find out how he escaped through the floor, which leads to his secret laboratory where he's been crafting some sort of ship made from tractor and helicopter parts, confirming he is a thing. Knowles notices Childs run off, and immediately after the power is cut. They assume Blair cut the generator. Soon it will be 100 below freezing, which will kill them all, but the thing can just freeze and go back to sleep. Mac declares they aren't getting out of there alive, but neither is that thing. They blow up its ship and go room by room, destroying just about everything. They go downstairs to the generator, or where the generator used to be, as it's simply gone. They split up to set charges to take the whole building down, and Gary gets attacked by the Blair thing. It gets its fingers way up in that flesh and drags him away. Knowles wanders off into the distance. I'm not sure if he's looking for Gary or what, but it's actually the last we see of him, and there is some noise from that direction, so the general consensus is he's dead. Mac notices his sudden isolation, and a thing charges him from under the floor, knocking him down and stealing the detonator. It bursts through the floor, and it is one beautiful motherfucker. It's got lots of teeth in lots of places. Mac grabs his already lit stick of thermite and chucks it at the thing, which is enough to set off the other explosives, effectively destroying the entire base with lots of big explosions. Mac wanders around through the flames and rubble. He has his scotch and a blanket, but he's clearly not doing too well. He plops down when Childs shows up behind him. Childs asks if he's the only one left, and Mac asks where he's been. He says he followed Blair and got lost in the storm. The fire can only keep them alive for a short time, but Mac thinks it may be best if they just freeze here together. The movie ends with them sharing a bottle of scotch, wondering if the other is a thing. So that's the thing. I'm actually not even sure where to start now. I guess I will just begin with my own theories on who was assimilated and when. I know that there aren't a ton of real answers, but it's just too much fun not to speculate. So first things first. Some people take Fuchs' ideas about a single cell being able to take over a body as gospel and use it to back up a ton of theories. I personally don't think this is the case. There is no on-screen evidence of something like that ever taking place. Every assimilation is really violent and gruesome. The thing literally has to devour you to replicate you. I suppose it could do that starting at one cell and slowly growing, but I feel like at some point the host would become aware of this situation. There would have to be a point where the host actually dies and it just gets super messy. The only slight contradiction to this I can think of is Windows, who begins assimilating super quickly after getting chomped by the Palmer thing. But the scene where he is being bitten and thrown around is actually pretty extended, and it's still very violent and very clearly an attack. So maybe a single cell of the right material within the thing would be enough to turn you, but I don't think it can just be any random cell from it, as most of your outward interaction with the thing is the DNA that it has replicated. I don't think the dog licking Bennings assimilated him. I don't think any of the bottle conspiracies have much weight. I don't think Blair maybe touching a random part of the split face thing with an eraser and then touching his chin assimilated him. Otherwise, an assimilated thing would just have to breathe on you, essentially. With that out of the way, let me get into what I actually think happened. The first person to get assimilated is obviously the shadow guy, and there are really only 3 options: Palmer, Norris, and Blair. From what I've seen, most people believe it to be Palmer, as that's who it was going to be before Carpenter switched him out for a crew member. But I have seen good argument that it probably can't be Palmer, because there are later scenes where he and Childs are alone and it would be the perfect time to attack. And I definitely don't think Childs is assimilated because of his later blood test. So the next most likely is Norris, and there isn't a ton to refute this idea, but I employed a strategy to figure this out that I actually haven't seen anybody else do. I just paid a lot of attention to the layout of the building, specifically this hallway, and there is kind of an answer right in front of us. When the dog is lurking around, we get a good look at the hallway, and where the room it enters is in relation to everything else. The dog walks past the buckets and boxes and goes into the room just past the boxes to the dog's left. We get another shot of this hallway right after Mac pulls the fire alarm when the dogs are being attacked. It's from the other direction, so the buckets and boxes have switched sides, so we're seeing the hall from the dog's perspective. So the room the dog went in is just past those boxes, and the person who comes out is Blair. We actually see Palmer come out of the room the dog almost went in but didn't. So it might have been Blair that was the first to be assimilated, even though the shadow looks nothing like him and his behavior from this point wouldn't make much sense as a thing. So the question I raise is, did Blair have a roommate? We see that Childs and Palmer are roommates, so I would assume most people had to share rooms, although we don't really see any other living quarters. So my theory is that Blair and Norris are roommates, and Norris is the one who was assimilated because Blair is simply working so hard against the thing early on, whereas Norris stays out of the spotlight, even refusing a leadership position at one point. I think Palmer is the next to be assimilated. There is a ton of time where this could have happened, lots of time where specifically he and Norris are not around. I'm still not sure when I think Blair was assimilated. It could have been super early on and the thing's strategy was to be left alone so we could work on the ship, but that just seems very far-fetched. It seems much more likely that he did kind of snap and either Norris or Palmer got to him early on in the shed. Oh, and it was either Palmer or Norris who destroyed the blood samples. Windows dropped the keys on the floor when he found Bennings being assimilated, so the thing simply had to pick them up and find out about the test. Blair was being locked up, so he is an unlikely candidate. And no, I do not think Childs or McCready were assimilated. I don't care about the comics or the video games. I have no interest in the lighting or Childs' supposed lack of breath. For the sake of this individual film and the wonderful, bleak ending it has, I think they are both human, very suspicious of each other, and going to freeze to death. I do wonder if either Knowles or Gary as things possibly survived the explosion. If both Mac and Childs did, I don't see it as an impossibility, but alas, it doesn't really matter, as do none of our speculations, but they're sure fun to talk about. Finally, I still need to talk about the Thing's release. People absolutely hated the Thing. They hated the themes, tones, the effects, the pacing, really everything that makes the movie so good. They hated the ambiguity and the nihilism. They hated the wonderful musical score. They thought these really smart characters were boring and that this amazing plot was really derivative. I could go on, but it's really so infuriating. And the saddest part is, this severely negative response impacted the rest of John Carpenter's career. He lost the directing position for Firestarter. He was bought out of his multi-film contract with Universal. Carpenter says he loves all the movies he made, but he acknowledges he probably would have made better ones if The Thing didn't bomb so hard. Thankfully, over time The Thing got viewed again through VHS and DVD and was slowly culturally reevaluated, and people saw just what a great film The Thing is. It now sits near the top of any decent horror movie ranking list, and it has many accolades. It has gone on to inspire so many other movies, both in and out of the horror genre. It still has a few naysayers with an 85 and 92 on Rotten Tomatoes, but some people just have bad taste. If you haven't seen The Thing, you absolutely should. It's my favorite work from John Carpenter, which is saying a lot, and it's generally one of my favorite films. Please let me know what y'all think of The Thing, and please share your theories with me down below. There is really so much I still didn't talk about. I want to thank my patron Jason for picking The Thing as my first patron-based review. As a reminder, if you join my Patreon, you instantly get to choose any movie you want for me to review. You also get to vote in other polls that will decide which movies I cover. I'm still deciding which horror franchise I'll be starting in the new year, so if you really want to see me cover one of these, head over to my Patreon to vote. But don't forget, you can also just email me with your requests as well. Well, that's about it. Next week we'll be watching a bit more of a comedic movie, Rare Exports: A Christmas Tale. As always, I'm Noah Hook, and thanks for watching Hamburgers and Horror. Stay safe out there. Thanks for watching my review of The Thing. If you enjoyed this review, please go like and subscribe so you can keep up with all my other content. And if you want to support the channel further, go check out my Instagram and Patreon. Thanks, y'all.